Bael is the first king of the Ars Goetia. The opening entry, page 1, seal 1. 66 legions under him, 3 heads, a toad, a man and a cat, and a voice the text calls hoarse. And out of everything a king of hell could be asked for, his one listed office is this: he makes the magician invisible. Hold that against what the name used to mean, because that name is not a name. It is the ordinary Hebrew word for lord, master, owner, the man who holds the property, and it was a job title long before anybody wrote it in a grimoire. 3,000 years ago, it belonged to the biggest weather god between Egypt and Mesopotamia, the one who broke the drought and put grain in the ground, and whole cities were built for him. That is the distance this episode covers, from the god who decided whether your family ate, to 66 legions and a party trick. You do not have to believe in Bael for any of this to be worth half an hour. The demotion is documented, and the people who carried it out left their names. Now, the word, because everything else tonight is downstream of it. In Hebrew, this word does ordinary work. The owner of an ox is one. The master of a house is one. A husband is one. It turns up in property law with no religion attached to it whatsoever, which is the first thing that should tell you what you are dealing with. So when the texts of the ancient Levant give a god this word, they are handing him a rank, not a name. And the way you tell one from another is by what comes after it. The lord of this mountain, the lord of that city, the lord of that valley. Numbers has Israel camped in the plains of Moab and attaching itself to the lord of a mountain called Peor. Judges has the townsmen of Shechem taking their own silver out of the temple of the Lord of the Covenant to hire soldiers with. 2 Kings has a king flat on his back sending men 40 miles to ask the Lord of Ekron whether he is going to live. 3 places, 3 shrines, 3 sets of people with entirely different problems, and the same word doing the same job in each of them, the way you would say the mayor of one town and the mayor of another. Different shrines, different priesthoods, different lords. The Bible's own writers treat them as separate concerns, and the idea that all of them were one entity with several branch offices is something later readers brought to the text, not something the text says. If banned books, the men who wrote them and the entities catalogued inside them are why you are here, make sure to subscribe to the Heretic Codex. Now, Peor, and what the text actually says happened there. It is worth stopping on, because it is the first time the word turns up as an enemy, and the scene is not what most people picture. It is not an invasion. Israel is camped at Shechem, the local women invite the men to sacrifices, the men eat and bow down, and within a few verses, the nation has attached itself to the Lord of that mountain. Nobody was conquered, it happened at dinner, and the penalty the text records is enormous, tens of thousands dead in a plague, which is the writer's way of setting the price on that particular border being crossed. Note the shape of it, because it repeats for the next 1,000 years. The threat is never a foreign army carrying a foreign god. It is the neighbors, and it arrives socially. The big one, the one the Hebrew prophets were actually fighting, was the storm god of the northern Levant, and we know a great deal about him because his own literature survived. A cache of clay tablets from the coastal city of Ugarit, written in the century or two before Israel had a monarchy, carries a long cycle of poems about him, and it is worth knowing what is in them before you meet the paragraph he ends up as. He rides the clouds. His voice is the thunder, and the poems say it splits cedar. He fights the sea and wins. And then he loses. He goes down into the throat of death, and while he is gone the world dries out and the fields crack, which is the part any farmer listening to it already knew about. When he comes back, the poem says the heavens rain oil and the valleys run with honey. That is not a minor local deity. That is a god whose story is the agricultural year of an entire coastline told by the people who lived on it. Rain, harvest, the sea kept in its place, death survived, everything that mattered, The kings of Israel then married into the dynasty that ran his cult and imported the whole apparatus, priesthood included. That is where the Bible's quarrel starts, and the quarrel is political before it is theological. Which brings us to a mountain, and to the single most theatrical scene in the entire Hebrew Bible. 1 Kings 18, and it is written like a set piece. 3 years without rain. Elijah puts a proposal to the king. Bring everyone to Carmel, bring the 450 prophets of Baal, and settle it. 2 bulls, 2 altars, no fire lit by human hands. Whichever God answers by fire is the real one, the crowd agrees, which itself tells you the contest was considered fair. Baal's prophets go first, and they go all morning. They call, nothing. They dance around the altar they made, nothing. And at noon, Elijah starts heckling them, and the text records the heckling in full, which is not something Scripture usually bothers to do. Shout louder, he says. He is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought. Perhaps he has stepped aside. Perhaps he is on a journey. Perhaps he is asleep and needs waking up. Then the prophets cut themselves with knives until the blood runs, and keep going until the evening. And the text says there was no voice, nobody answered, and nobody paid attention. Note what the sentence is doing. It does not say the god was weak, or that the god lost. It says nothing happened. Then Elijah rebuilds the old altar with 12 stones, digs a trench, has the whole thing drenched with water 3 times over, prays 4 sentences, and the fire falls and takes the offering, the wood, the stones, the dust and the water in the trench. That is the scene every later reader met first, and it set the terms. Not a god defeated in battle, a god ignored, out-argued and mocked in front of a crowd, the one who could not be bothered to answer. What happens next in the chapter is usually left out of the retelling. Elijah has the 450 prophets taken down to the brook Kishon and killed there, all of them. Then the rain comes, and then the queen sends him a message promising to do to him by tomorrow what he did to them. And the prophet who had just called down fire in front of a nation runs for his life into the desert and asks to die under a broom tree. Keep that ending in view, because it tells you the fight was not over and both sides knew it. It was still running 2 kings later, and the next round is uglier. Jehu, seizing the throne, announces that Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him much, and calls a great assembly. Every worshipper of Baal in the country is summoned, robes handed out at the door so nobody can be mistaken for anyone else, the building filled wall to wall. Then Jehu posts 80 men outside and has them all killed. The pillar is dragged out and burned, the house is pulled down, and the book of 2 Kings finishes the account with a detail nobody put there by accident. They made the place a latrine, and the text says it was still one when the account was written. That is the mocking on Carmel escalated into architecture. It got applied to buildings. Now watch it get applied to the spelling. Of everything in this episode, this is the piece I would put in front of a skeptic. Israelite parents named their children with Baal in the name, the way you would name a child with a word for Lord. Saul's son is called Eshbaal in the book of Chronicles. Jonathan's son is called Merib-Baal in the same book. Perfectly ordinary names, on the record, in the family lists. Now open the book of Samuel and look for the same men. Saul's son appears there as Ishbosheth. Jonathan's son appears as Mephibosheth. Same men, same fathers, same stories. The syllable Baal has been taken out and the word Bosheth has been put in, and Bosheth is the Hebrew word for shame. 2 books of the same Bible, 2 men, 4 spellings, and the difference is an editorial decision applied to both of them. Somebody went through and swapped the Lord out for the shame. Nobody hid it either. Both versions were kept, which is why you can lay them side by side and watch it happen. That is not a demon story. That is a documented act of demotion, carried out by scribes on the page, done to a child's name in a family list. Now the same instinct, applied to a god's own title. The setting is worth having, because the Bible gives it a whole scene. A king of Israel falls through a lattice in an upper room and cannot get up. Hurt, frightened, and wanting to know whether he will live, he sends messengers out of the country to put the question to that Philistine oracle, not his own priests. A foreign shrine, because in a crisis, he wants the answer from the source with the reputation. Elijah meets the messengers on the road and turns them around with a question that is really an accusation. Is it because there is no God in Israel that you are going to inquire of the Lord of Ekron? The king got his answer, and it was not the one he had sent for. The prophet's word was that he would not come down from the bed he had gone up to, and the chapter ends 4 verses later with him dead. He had sent 40 miles for a second opinion and received the first one back with interest. That is the political fact underneath every polemic in this episode. These were not marginal cults. They were the option a frightened king reached for first. And the second half of that oracle's title, in the Hebrew of 2 Kings, is the word for a fly, Lord of the Flies. It reads like a joke, and it very likely is one, because there is a word sitting one consonant away that makes far better sense as part of a shrine's own name, and that word means prince, or exalted house, the Lord who is prince, the Lord of the high place. That is what the neighbors would have called him, and it is the version that surfaces centuries later in the Gospels, where the ruler of the demons carries the prince ending rather than the insect one. If that reconstruction is right, and most readers of the passage think it is, then his own worshippers called him prince, and the book written by his enemies changed one consonant and called him vermin, something you swat, breeding on something dead. Whether the editors were doing polemics on purpose or simply writing the form they had inherited cannot be settled from the page. What is not in doubt is the result. 3,000 years later, the mangled version is the only one anybody remembers, and the lords of the Levant enter the Christian imagination pre-demoted, with the insults already baked into their names. Everything up to this point is history, and it is checkable line by line. From here on, it is demonology. The record changes character, the sources get later, and nothing that follows is evidence about the ancient world. It is evidence about the people writing it down. And one condition has to be set before crossing that line, because the whole second half rests on it. Nobody can prove the spirit in the grimoire is this God carried down. That link is a reading, not a record. What is documented is the word, the same title, meaning Lord, attached to a god the prophets fought, and later attached to a spirit, filed at number 1 in an early modern manual. No text anywhere in the transmission stops to say the two are the same. Nobody wrote the bridge. Take the identification as the strong likelihood it is, hold it loosely, and watch what happens to the entry either way. Skip forward past the fall of the Levantine cities, past the Gospels, past 15 centuries of Christian writers cataloguing devils, and stop in 1577, in the Rhineland, at the desk of a court physician. Johann Weyer had a list. It runs to 69 spirits, each with a rank, a shape, a number of legions and a trade, and he printed it as an exhibit inside a much longer argument that the whole subject was a fraud and that burning women over it was murder. And he is explicit about where he got it. He is not composing a hierarchy, he is reproducing something that was already circulating in manuscript, a handbook of spirits and their offices that existed before he touched it, and that nobody today can hand you a clean copy of. At this point in his own argument, Weyer is a copyist, and hold on to that. Bael is entry number 1. Weyer's entry is short, and every detail in it survives into the Goetia 300 years later. King, East, 66 legions, 3 heads, hoarse voice, invisibility. Every detail you heard at the top of this episode, already fixed in place 327 years before the book most people own was printed. Read that as an inventory, and it is unremarkable. Set it beside Carmel, and it is one of the strangest documents in this whole lane. The storm god's entire portfolio is gone. No rain, no lightning, no harvest, no fertility, no dying and rising, no sea to fight. A being whose worship was about whether a nation ate is now listed as a supplier of a single conjuring effect. He makes you hard to see. And there is no note in the margin. Not one surviving copy of this entry pauses to remark that a national god is being filed as a minor utility. The demotion is total and completely casual, which is exactly how demotions of that size actually happen. Two details in that entry deserve a moment, because they are the kind of thing a reader slides past. 66 legions, the unit these writers reached for when they wanted to say how much of hell a spirit controls, is a Roman army formation, same borrowing as the ranks. The hierarchy in this book is a human one, from top to bottom. And the hoarse voice, it sounds like colour, and it is not. Hoarseness recurs across this catalogue on spirit after spirit, more consistently than any other physical trait. Something in the tradition decided that whatever comes when you call it does not sound well. Mathers and Crowley carried the entry straight through into the Ars Goetia of 1904, 327 years after Bael set it down, unchanged in substance, with the rank confirmed and one thing added that Bael never had: the seal. A drawn sigil, a shape to be inscribed on metal and worn, and the instruction that the spirit will not appear without it. Where those drawings came from, and who first put ink to them, is not recorded anywhere in the chain. They simply arrive with the English manuscripts. First spirit, first seal, first page. Every printed Goetia since opens on him. It is worth being clear about what that page was for, in the past tense, because the answer explains the shape of the entry. This was a working document. Somebody was meant to hold it. The book surrounding the 72 entries gives a whole apparatus, a circle drawn on the ground with the operator inside it, a triangle drawn outside the circle at a set distance, and the flat assumption that the thing being called will lie unless it is standing in that triangle. The entries are written to be consulted mid-operation, which is why they read like personnel files rather than mythology. Rank, so you know how to address it. Shape, so you know what you are looking at. Legions, so you know what stands behind it. Office, so you know what to ask for. That is a manual, and its first page is the god of the storm reduced to one line of service, which leaves the picture, because most people who know Bael know him from an image rather than a text. The famous one comes from Colin de Plancy's Dictionnaire Infernal in the illustrated edition of 1863, drawn by Louis Le Breton. It is a small, extraordinary engraving, 3 heads, the toad on the left, the man in the middle, the cat on the right, all of them sitting on a squat body carried by 8 thin spider legs. Look for those legs in the Goetia. They are not there. Look for them in Via. Not there either. The texts give you 3 heads on a body they never describe, and an illustrator in 19th century Paris solved the composition problem by putting the heads on a spider. That drawing is now the mental image of Bael for millions of people, including everyone who has met him in a video game. A picture invented in 1863 has outrun 3,000 years of source material. There is a dry lesson in that, and it applies to nearly every demon anyone can picture. Now the correction, because there is one confusion attached to this spirit that comes up every single time, and it deserves to be killed properly rather than waved at. Bael is not Beelzebub. People believe it for 2 reasons, and both are worth answering by name. The first is that the names sound alike, and both begin from that same word for Lord, true and irrelevant, because half the deities in the region begin from it. Sharing that word makes 2 gods colleagues, not the same person. The second is that later occult writers did merge them. Once the demonologies started competing to sound comprehensive, that is a fact about 19th century occultists, not about the texts they claim to be passing on. Now the check itself. Weyer puts Bael at number 1 of his 69, and the Goetia puts him at number 1 of its 72, and neither catalogue contains an entry for Beelzebub anywhere in it. He was never on the list. In the Gospels he is the ruler of the demons, a category above any catalogue entry, and the New Testament never mentions Bael at all. It is not a translation error. It is not a lost manuscript. It is not two names for one figure. Two different towns had two different lords. Both got demoted, separately, centuries apart, and later writers filed them as one figure because the names sound alike. So that is who Bael is not. Which leaves the question this episode opened with, and the answer is the reason the entry matters at all. Why is Bael first? Start with what he is not, because the obvious answers all fail. He is not the strongest. 66 legions puts him mid-table, and Belial and Paimon both command more. He is not the most useful. Invisibility is a modest ask next to a spirit who turns metal into gold or tells you what is coming. And he did not earn the slot from the compilers because the compilers did not choose it. Weyer says he is copying a book that already existed, and Mathers and Crowley reprinted Weyer's order without touching it. So the number 1 spot was never awarded. It was inherited from a manuscript nobody can produce, compiled by a person nobody can name, at a date nobody can fix. That is the finding, and it is worth more than a tidy answer because it tells you what kind of document this is, a running order nobody ever signed. Which leaves the question of why that name was at the top of the manuscript in the first place, and here the honest ground runs out and the reasonable guess begins. Whoever assembled the original was a European Christian working from the sources a European Christian had, and there is exactly one rival in those sources that runs from Numbers through Judges through Kings, gets a mountaintop confrontation staged against it in front of 450 of its own prophets, had a queen importing its priesthood, and ended up with its temple turned into a latrine by royal decree. If you were ranking the opposition, and you had read that, you would open on that name too. The catalogue's first king is the Bible's first enemy. Whether that is cause or coincidence cannot be settled from what survives, and this channel is not going to pretend otherwise. But the pattern is sitting there in the open, and it has been sitting there since 1577. That is what entry number 1 actually records, not a demon's rank, a grudge filed. And there is one more step, which happened long after the books stopped mattering. Go and look at how Bael appears now, in games, in card art, in the endless recycled demon compendiums online. He is almost always the spider, not the entry, the engraving. A god who answered for the rain became a paragraph, and the paragraph lost, even to its own illustration. So look at that entry one last time. 3 heads on nothing in particular, a voice that does not sound well, and the power to keep a man from being seen. That is the whole inheritance. Nobody recorded the moment it happened. The scribes who turned a lord into a shame and a prince into vermin were not building a demonology. They were winning an argument. Whoever set the running order simply wrote down what he had received, and the men who printed it in 1904 did the same. The open question is the one worth sitting with. If entry number 1 is a god the prophets spent 4 centuries arguing with, then what is the rest of the list? 71 more entries, each with a rank, a shape, and a trade. How many of those were somebody's lord? Which of the 72 do you think has a god underneath it? Tell me in the comments, and if you want the whole catalogue, every rank and every legion, the complete guide to all 72 is already in this library, and it ends on where the number itself came from. Make sure to subscribe to the Heretic Codex.